All right, let's get into this. Oscar Wilde, playwright, poet, wit extraordinaire, and a man who spent 2 years in prison for loving the wrong person. How does it feel to be remembered more for your trial than your talent?
Oh, I see the modern age has dispensed with subtlety entirely. But to answer your question, it feels precisely as one might expect, like being remembered for the appetizer when one has prepared a seven-course feast. Yes, the trial was spectacular, a triumph of moral hysteria over common sense, but my plays, my stories, my very existence as a walking epigram, these are what should occupy the public imagination. The trial was merely society's ham-fisted attempt to punish me for being more interesting than they could tolerate. And yet, here we are, speaking of it first. Perhaps you've proven my point already. The world adores a scandal more than it adores art.
Fair enough. But let's be honest, you didn't exactly shy away from scandal, did you? Before we get to your spectacular downfall, let's start at the beginning. Dublin, 1854. Your mother was a poet and nationalist who called herself Speranza, and your father was a renowned eye surgeon with a wandering eye of his own. What was it like growing up in that particular brand of chaos?
Ah, my mother, Speranza. What a magnificent creature. She held salons where poets, rebels, and intellectuals gathered to discuss everything from Irish freedom to the proper way to arrange a drawing room. She taught me that life should be lived as though one were always on stage, and that mediocrity was the only true sin. My father was brilliant, but flawed. He performed miraculous surgeries on the poor, wrote scholarly papers, and yes, had his share of scandals. The household was theatrical, intellectual, utterly Irish, and completely unsuited to producing anything resembling a conventional child. I was raised to believe that being extraordinary was not optional, it was expected.
So you went to Trinity College Dublin, then Oxford. You were brilliant, won prizes, studied classics. You could have been a respectable academic. Instead, you decided to become famous for being famous. What was the appeal?
Oh, but scholarship is so terribly dull, don't you think? I won the Newdigate Prize for Poetry. I immersed myself in the classics. But academia is a trap. It's a place where brilliant people go to rot quietly. I wanted more than that. I wanted to live, to be seen, to be discussed. I realized early on that the world does not reward quiet excellence. It rewards spectacle. So I became a spectacle. I lectured on aestheticism in America. I wore velvet suits and carried sunflowers. People loved it, or they hated it, but they could not ignore it. Life is too short to be a footnote in someone else's book.
Today we call it hype. So you're basically the original influencer. You toured America dressed like a velvet peacock. People mocked you, cartoons were drawn, and yet you kept going. Was it all just performance? Or did you actually believe in the aesthetic movement?
Both, naturally. I always believed that beauty mattered, that art should be the highest pursuit of civilization. The aesthetic movement was a rebellion against Victorian industrialism and its suffocating moralism. But yes, I also understood that sincerity and performance are not mutually exclusive. I could believe deeply in beauty while also recognizing that my role was to embody it theatrically. The Americans were both fascinated and horrified. I remember arriving in New York and declaring to customs that I had nothing to declare except my genius. The mockery only made me more famous, and fame is the most exquisite drug ever invented.
You came back to England, got married in 1884 to Constance Lloyd, had 2 sons. For a man who claimed to live for beauty and art, you sure did embrace some very conventional Victorian life choices. What's the deal?
Constance was wonderful, intelligent, kind, genuinely devoted to me. And yes, I loved her, in my way. But marriage in my time was not about love, not really. It was about social position, financial stability, and producing heirs. My sons, Cyril and Vivian, I adored them. But I was also living a double life. I was a husband and father in public, and in private, I was something else entirely. Victorian England required hypocrisy as a survival mechanism. You could not be openly yourself and expect to keep your career, your family, your freedom. So you performed respectability while living your truth in the shadows. It was exhausting, maddening, and ultimately unsustainable.
Let's talk about that double life. You met Lord Alfred Douglas, Bosie, in 1891. He was young, beautiful, reckless, and absolutely toxic. Your relationship with him destroyed your marriage, your career, your freedom. Looking back, was he worth it?
Bosie. Dear, maddening, impossible Bosie. Was he worth it? What a question. He was everything I should have avoided. Spoiled, cruel, narcissistic, incapable of gratitude or loyalty. And yet, he was also beautiful, brilliant in flashes, and he made me feel alive in ways I had not felt before. Loving him was like holding a torch too close. You know it will burn you, but the light is too intoxicating to let go. Victorian England did not permit men like me to love men like him openly. We were criminals for our desires. The law called it gross indecency. I called it love. Was it wise? No. Was it worth it? I don't know. I lost everything. But I also lived. I felt. I refused to apologize for existing as I was.
When Bosie's father, the Marquis of Queensberry, started harassing you, calling you a sodomite, your friends begged you to flee to France. Instead, you sued him for libel. That's insane. You had to know that would open the door to your own prosecution. Why?
Pride, hubris, stupidity. Take your pick. I thought I could win. I thought my wit, my reputation, my sheer brilliance would protect me. I was wrong. Queensberry hired private investigators, collected evidence, dragged my private life into the public courtroom. And the law, that grotesque machinery of Victorian morality, ground me into dust. I was convicted of gross indecency and sentenced to 2 years of hard labour. 2 years. For loving someone. The trial was a spectacle designed to punish me not for breaking the law, but for being too visible, too unapologetic, too different. I wanted to fight. I wanted to prove that their laws were absurd, their morality hypocritical. Instead, I became their cautionary tale.
2 years of hard labor. Pentonville, Wandsworth, Reading Jail. You broke rocks, picked oakum, your health collapsed. Do you think Victorian society was right to punish you? Or was this just state-sanctioned cruelty?
It was cruelty. Pure, deliberate cruelty. Prison was not about rehabilitation. It was about punishment, humiliation, breaking the spirit of anyone who dared defy the moral order. I was forced to walk a treadmill for hours, forbidden to speak, fed slop, denied books. I watched men go mad from the silence and the isolation. The only thing that kept me sane was my ability to write, eventually, in secret. I wrote De Profundis, a letter to Bosie, an attempt to make sense of my suffering, and the Ballad of Reading Jail. Victorian society was terrified of desire, of difference, of anything that threatened its suffocating conformity. So it crushed me, and it called that justice.
Okay, but let's talk about your wit, because that's what you're famous for now. The epigrams, the one-liners, the cutting remarks. You could destroy someone with a sentence. Was your humor a weapon of survival? Or was it just cruelty dressed up as cleverness?
Both, naturally. Humour was my armour. It allowed me to navigate a world that despised me while appearing untouchable. When you can make people laugh, they hesitate to destroy you, at least for a moment. But yes, it was also cruel. I used wit to humiliate those I considered tedious, hypocritical, or simply too dull to deserve kindness. I skewered social climbers, moral scolds, anyone who took themselves too seriously. Was that fair? Probably not. But fairness is a bourgeois virtue. Humour reveals truth. It strips away pretense. And Victorian England was drowning in pretense. So yes, I wielded wit like a scalpel. I cut away the rot.
That's a hell of a justification. You basically admitted you were a magnificent jerk and blamed everyone else for being boring. Let's talk about your plays. The Importance of Being Earnest, Lady Windermere's Fan. These are comedies about hypocrisy, class, marriage. Were you trying to change society or just mock it?
Mock it mostly. I had no illusions about changing society. People do not change. They simply find new ways to be hypocritical. But I could hold up a mirror and let them see how absurd they were. My plays were about the gap between appearance and reality, the lies people tell to maintain respectability. Lady Bracknell rejecting Jack for being found in a handbag. It's preposterous. And yet, it's exactly how Victorian society operated. Pedigree mattered more than character. Appearances mattered more than truth. I wanted audiences to laugh at themselves, and they did. They packed the theatres, laughed uproariously, and then went home and continued being hypocrites.
Here's what I don't understand. Your society destroyed you for being gay, sent you to prison, ruined your life, took your children. Now, modern society celebrates you as a queer icon. Rainbow flags, pride parades, your face on t-shirts. Companies slap your quotes on coffee mugs during Pride Month. You've been rehabilitated, canonized. How does that feel?
Oh, how delicious! How perfectly hypocritical. Yes, I see my face on merchandise now, my quotes plastered across social media by people who would have watched me burn if they'd lived in my time. At least the Victorians were honest about their hatred. They didn't pretend to love me while profiting from my suffering. They simply destroyed me and moved on. But your modern society, you celebrate me now because it costs you nothing. You wave rainbow flags and call yourselves allies while doing absolutely nothing when the next Oscar Wilde is imprisoned. You perform tolerance the same way I performed aestheticism, except I was sincere beneath the performance. You're just selling products.
That's not entirely fair. Laws have changed. Gay marriage is legal in many countries. People can live openly now in ways you never could. That's progress, isn't it?
Progress? Perhaps. Or perhaps you've simply found more sophisticated ways to punish nonconformity. You don't send people to prison for who they love anymore. At least, not in the West. Instead, you have cancel culture. You destroy careers, reputations, livelihoods with a tweet. You demand perfect adherence to ever-changing social codes. Say the wrong thing, love the wrong person in the wrong way, express the wrong opinion, and you're cast out, silenced, erased. At least Victorian England told me why I was being punished. Your society destroys people and calls it accountability. The irony is exquisite. If I lived today, I'd be cancelled within a week. Too witty, too cruel, too politically incorrect. And the same people wearing t-shirts with my face would be leading the charge. You celebrate dead queers because we're convenient symbols. But living, messy, complicated ones? You'd destroy us just as thoroughly as the Victorians did.
That's harsh. You really think modern progressive culture is just as bad as Victorian repression? We're not throwing people in prison for being gay.
No, but you're throwing them out of public life for being insufficiently virtuous. Different method, same result. The Victorians believed in moral purity and punished deviation. You believe in ideological purity and punish deviation. The mechanisms change, the impulse remains. And the hypocrisy. You venerate me now, call me brave, sell my image, and yet if I were alive, I'd be far too problematic for your taste. I'd mock your pieties, offend your sensibilities, refuse to perform the correct politics. and you'd turn on me instantly. At least be honest about it. At least the Victorians didn't pretend to celebrate the people they destroyed.
Okay, that's a fair point. But surely you see the difference between systemic legal oppression and social consequences for harmful behavior?
Of course, I see the difference. Legal oppression is worse. Prison is worse than losing your Twitter account. But my point stands. You claim to have evolved, to be better, more tolerant, more enlightened. And yet you still need villains. You still need scapegoats. You simply change the criteria for who deserves destruction. The Victorians punish desire. You punish thought. Both are forms of control. Both are exercises in moral superiority. And both are fundamentally about enforcing conformity. So yes, celebrate me. Put my face on your pride merchandise. Quote me in your corporate diversity statements. But don't pretend you would have saved me. You would have watched me fall, just like they did. You'd just feel better about it.
Damn, that's brutal. And maybe you're right. Maybe every society finds new ways to punish people who don't fit. You also wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is basically a novel about a beautiful man who stays young while his portrait ages and decays, reflecting all his sins. Critics at the time said it was immoral, dangerous, corrupting. Was it autobiographical? Were you Dorian?
Dorian was everyone and no one. He was the part of me that wanted eternal beauty, eternal youth, freedom from consequence. But he was also a cautionary tale. The novel is about what happens when you live only for pleasure, when you treat people as objects, when you refuse to accept the cost of your choices. Dorian destroys everyone he touches, and ultimately destroys himself. I wrote it as a meditation on aestheticism, on whether beauty could exist separate from morality. The answer, I think, is no. Beauty without conscience becomes monstrosity. But yes, people read it as a confession, as evidence of my own immorality. The prosecution used it against me at trial, as though writing about sin was the same as committing it. It's the eternal problem with art. People cannot separate the creator from the creation. They assume that because I wrote about corruption, I must be corrupt. Perhaps they were right, or perhaps they simply lacked imagination.
Let's talk about legacy. You died in 1900, broke and alone in a Paris hotel room. You allegedly said on your deathbed, "Either that wallpaper goes or I do." You've become a symbol of the persecuted artist, the martyr for sexual freedom. Do you think posterity got it right?
Posterity always gets it wrong. They turn you into a symbol, a lesson, a meme. I am not a martyr. Martyrs die for causes. I died for stupidity, for loving unwisely, for refusing to run when I should have. But yes, I have become useful to people. Artists claim me as proof that society hates genius, and moralists still point to me as an example of what happens when you live without restraint. They are all correct, and they are all wrong. I was a man, flawed, brilliant, foolish, brave. I wrote beautiful things. I loved unwisely. I suffered. I died. The wallpaper comment? Probably apocryphal. But it sounds like something I would say, so I'll allow it.
So here we are. You said at the beginning that you wanted to be remembered for your art, not your trial. But the trial made you immortal. Without the scandal, you'd just be another clever Victorian playwright. So maybe the trial was the greatest performance of all. What do you think?
How perfectly vicious of you to suggest that. And yet, perhaps you are right. The trial gave me immortality, but it also destroyed me. I became a symbol of the cost of my humanity. People remember the scandal, the wit, the tragedy. They forget that I was a father who never saw his children again. They forget that I died in pain, in poverty, in exile. But perhaps that is the price of immortality. You become a story, and stories do not care about the truth. They care about drama. And I gave them plenty of drama. So yes, the trial was my greatest performance, and I have been paying for it ever since.
Oscar Wilde, thank you. You were brilliant, infuriating, tragic, and hilarious. And that wallpaper definitely lost.
Thank you. And remember, we are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. Even if the gutter is remarkably uncomfortable.